So my name is Eric Chrobak. I'm really excited to go over this with everyone today. I am a CRM engineer at Vaspian. It's a VoIP company based out of Buffalo, New York. I am the resident Zoho engineer, although anything Zoho related, whether it's database management, cleaning up data, I wear a lot of hats in that regard. There'll be coding to like I said, data fixing, data transformation, using Zoho Data Prep actually. I'm Chicago based, even though our company is based out of Buffalo. I'm in Chicago, in the US. So I've been in the Zoho space for a little over 12 years now. Started out implementing it for a company I worked at, and then over time we realized that we needed to automate the company's processes. So I started learning to program. I started setting up workflows and Deluge functions, and then we migrated to books. And then from there, I started getting involved in more web development. And so I took a Ruby on Rails programming bootcamp, and I learned the full stack there, and have been able to use a lot of those skills in that context. And then I worked also for a couple Zoho consultancies, Cloud Bakers and Catalyst Connect. There were two of the larger Zoho consultancies in North America, or Zoho partners. So I worked for them for a while and consulted clients going all the way up to $1 billion+ in revenue. So I've worked across the spectrum in the Zoho space. What actually let me pause there. I skipped a point. Currently where I'm at, we actually are all in on Zoho. So we are using the full scale of the Zoho apps currently. So we're using CRM, desk books, creator, project, sign, analytics, forms, and it could go on. There's about 20 different apps that we're using. So we're integrating those together. We're also integrating those with our platforms. So we provide both text messaging to clients, we provide phone lines, and so we're integrating those with Zoho to pull in usage, to generate invoices, and the like. As I transition into today's topic, programming and development can seem a little dry, so I thought it'd be good to transition with this. Computers, especially nowadays, AI is a real big thing, but the one thing you have to keep in mind is computers will never fully replace humans until they learn to laugh at the boss's jokes. And I don't think that's going to happen. There are 10 kinds of people in this world: those who don't understand binary, and those who don't. Those who understand binary and those who don't. The last one here is programming is 10% writing code and 90% understanding why it's not working, which I think is a great segue here. As the joke said, 90% understanding why it's not working, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the angle I want to take is developing more maintainable applications. So as you're writing your code, as you're developing, as you're figuring out how to handle your errors, the end goal really would be developing more maintainable applications. And there's a couple principles that kind of drive how I write code, and that's dry, do not repeat yourself. So if there's something that I wrote that I can reuse, then I'll reuse it without rewriting it. So that might be a reusable function. If I'm writing a custom application, that could be a class, which leads to more modular applications. That's another component of maintainable applications, is that your application is modular. So for instance, if you let's say you have 5 different types of invoices that you need to generate throughout for different applications, then you may want to just have one function to generate the invoice, and you just pass a couple arguments or parameters to the function. And then you have a modular function where it would be a REST API function, and that becomes a modular application. And then also it's iterative. So you're constantly deploying, right? Or the term that you may have heard, the minimal viable product. So you're working to see what's the minimum to move this forward to the next step, and let's get that done and then improve on it. So today we're going to talk about Deluge error handling. I'm gonna go over where I'm currently at, where I came from, and where I'm headed. So the past, present, and future as far as how I'm handling error handling. We're going to talk about some additional tools that you will find useful. There may be scenarios where the Deluge code is getting unwieldy. It's getting large, it's getting complex, and it's difficult to make it less complex. And you may find you need an additional tool, or Deluge may just not be the right tool. And talk about different use cases for that. So I have 2 blocks of code in here. So I'm going to talk about the first version that I developed, and then the second version. And what this is doing is it's creating an invoice off of an opportunity, or a deal, I should say. So I started out by setting a string that I'm going to write all of the tests. So I'm going to check all the values that I'm looking to receive when I'm making API calls. Then the next thing I do here, and you'll see later on why I do this, but I'm pulling some CRM variables that I'm going to reference later. And I like to set the Zoho books, or the Zoho finance applications, the organization ID. I like to set it as a CRM variable. That way, anytime I'm writing code, I can just go ahead and drop this line in there. And I don't have to go look for it. I don't have to remember what it is. Same with the CRM subdomain. So right now I'm in the sandbox up here. And so if I'm developing scripts in the sandbox or in production, I may have an open URL. Especially in this case, this is for a button. And so the button is to create, actually this will be more relevant on the next example I'm going to show. But if you're at the account level and you want to create a deal, and then you want to redirect the user to the deal, then you're going to need to make sure you have the proper URL. And if you're working in both sandbox and production, you don't want to have to go back and change the URL that's opened when you push the changes out of the sandbox. So what I've done is I set the subdomain. In this case, I'm in CRM sandbox. That's the subdomain here. And then in production, the subdomain is CRM. And then I have a couple other variables in here, such as the org ID, which is another variable you'll have in the string, or in the URL here. And then developer email. This is pulling my email, and then it's going to send an email to me later on. Okay, so let's move forward. I have an API call that I'm making here, and in order to write what's worked really good for me to consistently check values is just to make a direct API call. Then it's a lot easier for me to copy and paste to write tests that are fairly similar throughout to check the responses, versus if I do a mix of, say, direct API calls and the wrappers, or the integration tasks, then I have to adjust to see what I'm receiving when I make this, in this case, in this get call. So here I want to get the deal, and then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if I got the data back, which I should, because I'm passing the record ID. So there's no reason that you shouldn't get it. Once you have this working, there should be no reason that you shouldn't get it. But as you're progressing through, you're starting out writing your function, you're going to want to check to see that this is valid. So did I get a null value? No. Does it have the key data? which when you're doing a get or a post or a put, your response is going to be include it's in data. It's going to be wrapped in data in the key. So from here, doing a test, I was able to access the opportunity data is passing. Now, I'm going to close this block and show what happens if it's failing. So what I have here is saying it's failing. And the reason is, and I pull the code from the response, and then I write the failure message, which is I get from the message key. So this was the older way of doing that. And as you scroll through, you'll see from here, I want to get the contact and then the contact persons, because when you create an invoice, you need to know who the account's for and who's it going to get emailed to. And it continues on. And I don't want to dig too deep into that. It's going to be much of the same of what I just showed you, where you're going to pull some data, you're going to verify that you received it, and then you're going to have a series of if-else. The problem that I found here is one, it made the code to be extra long. It also, when it fails, all of this is being written over, and there's a lot of data that comes back. And when it's successful, you get something as well. So here, you're going to write that it's passing here if it's successful, which isn't as useful. What's more useful is knowing where you had a failure. So you get a lot of content back. Well, assuming that we failed somewhere in here, after all this is done, I have this if here, and it says if passing, and it should be true equals, if passing equals false, then send an email to myself. And I put a URL in there too. So in the email, I can just click on it and go to it. So for a first version, this worked out great. But like I said, there was a couple cons to it. There was a lot of extra code that I had to add in here. It made it a little hard to read it. But I did get notified if there was an error message. I did get I did get details about that, so that was really helpful. So if I scroll down and I go to the next iteration, so this is another invoice generation. So what's different here is I added, one of the first things I did is I added a try. So I used the built-in try catch from Deluge. Also, what I do different here is my tests. I'm setting them as a list. All right, so on the second iteration, so this is creating another invoice off of a deal. And in this case, I start out, instead of having a string for my tests, I'm making a list. And then as I start to get into it, I do a try. Because what I was noticing is that at times the code would just break. And I didn't necessarily have a way to catch that, whether that was, it wouldn't have been an error such as if I deleted the semicolon and I didn't have a semicolon, because I wouldn't be able to save it here. But it might be other errors that were just problems with the code and with the way I wrote it that would cause the function to break. So the try catch helped notify me of those. But then if I move through here past the first bit of code to where the first checks are, the first tests. So what I did for the first one is I set it to a map. And then I put a name for that. And in this case, I was looking to get the scrub batch. So we, since our clients do bulk SMS, they may provide us with a list of their phone numbers, their clients' phone numbers, and we'll need to verify that those are phone numbers. So we'll what we call it, scrub the list for valid mobile numbers that they can send a message to. And then for each time we run a batch, then we invoice them. So here I'm putting what the first action is. I'm trying to receive the record from CRM. And then I start out by putting a fail message in here. That way I don't have to define it later. And then if I was able to successfully retrieve it, then I put a message of successful. And then I also want to check to make sure that it wasn't already invoiced. So I go here and I check to see if it was invoiced. I pull that value. If it was invoiced, if it was not invoiced, then proceed. If it failed, then it would say that it was already invoiced. And if it succeeded, then we'll overwrite that with a success message. And for those of you who are familiar with books, you go through the process of grabbing the contacts, getting the contact persons, and then whoever is supposed to be receiving the email will get added to the invoice. And then you're also grabbing the products. So I have tests there to confirm those details. You certainly could get more verbose here than this, but without over engineering, where I found a happy medium is to provide these tests, if you want to call them, after I'm pulling data, right? I'm catching the code breaking with the try catch. The editor's notifying me if I have most of the syntax errors, and then these tests here are helping to make sure that I'm receiving data, or if I scroll on down past the creation of the invoice map, keep on going here. So then one of the last components of this is I'm creating the invoice. And then I'm checking that the invoice was created. And then I'll update the batch record in the CRM that it was invoiced. And in this case, I have to put a date on there because when we receive it, we don't get the date. And then I have one final test to make sure that we updated the CRM record is invoiced, and then that means we're passing. This whole batch of code was successfully passed. Then here's my catch, and I'm putting in the test of the whole function. I'm adding it to the test map, and then at the end here, I'm looping over all those tests. And I'm assigning those to what I call a log message. So the first one, I do test2, and let's say the whole thing broke. Then it would say test whole function, test2 test whole function, and then it would get the message. And in this case, it's the E here, what failed. And since we don't have it's not null and it's not success, we skip over this and we move over here. And then in this case, the reason would be whatever the value of E is. So perfect example where you could have an E value is, I'm not sure if anybody else experiences this, but if I chose to pass the name and the message as like hard coded in here, name, test, do another one, message, and then E. I found this doesn't work, right? So this is where I'll get an E. I'll get a value for E, and it'll state. Well, I guess if I did this further up, then I would get a message, and it would state invalid expression. So that's an example of an error that you would get through here. Or if another example of an error is if I go up to the connection here. Let's do another connection, the CRM connection. So since I'm in Sandbox, this is actually the production connection. So if I tried to run this, I would get an error that would say unauthenticated connection. That would be the type of message you would get in the E here. So that would come here and it would say failing, and it would give you your reason, and then it would concatenate those together as you loop over every test. So I have 8 tests here. So was it invoiced? Did the invoice get created? Were we able to pull the items from books? Were we able to pull the contact persons? Were we able to pull the contact? Were we able to retrieve the batch record? And then it would let us know. And then the last thing is an email gets sent out. Not sure why it's cut off at the bottom here, but yeah, if it's passing, then it sends out an email. So similar to the other one. I created a function here to show the current process that I have. And I am going to copy and paste chunks of it together and we'll work through it. So it starts out, where I'm currently at, starts out very similar to what I've shown. So I am doing a try. I added another check in here to see if the ID was actually passed. So I would actually need to add the value here. So this is a button that's on the account where it would create a deal. So just to show some more examples of testing and making sure that you're not going to run into errors, I'm checking to make sure that the ID is not null. And then we're going to try and run all this code. So very similar start to the other functions that I've shown. We're grabbing some variables, some CRM variables. I'm setting the base URL because I'm gonna do all invoke URLs here. Where it starts to differ is here when I run my first test. So I'm defining it as a map and passing the value in. Now I'm only passing one key value pair, and so I won't get an error message. If I start passing more than one key value pair, there's instances where I encounter errors. And then in case we fail, I just pull the message response right away. And then if we're passing, so to trigger list here, come back as null or not. And if not, is it greater than 0? Then we were able to retrieve the account data. So that's the first thing I want to do here. Then we're going to get the account map. When you are making the invoke URL call, you get a key value pair and you pull the data from the data key, which is a list. And then in order to get the first record, if you're only pulling one, which in this case I am, then you want to do your get here. And I put that to the account map. And then there's some required fields that we need in our environment. So the required fields are deal name, pipeline stage. So let's start out with the account name. We do need to set the account name for the deal. But the deal name itself, so I like to keep deal names standard, and if possible, have it generate via a button. That way the sales team isn't creating all sorts of interesting names. So that's something that I typically do, and date stamp it in the name. Because you may have a client who makes multiple sales with you, and it might be the same product. Well, it'd be nice to have the date stamp in the name, because when you're looking at a list of them, it might be hard to sort through which one you're looking at. Okay, let's add some other things on there. I'm gonna just copy and paste everything that's coming from the account map. Put that in here. So we've got a closing date. We've got the phone, pipeline, type, stage, website, all the address information. You don't have to put a contact in this scenario, but I did. And so what I did here is I just searched for contacts whose account name equals the account the button is on. And then I have another invoke URL, and then I have another test here to see if we retrieve the contact data. And then put another block in. And then when you're doing a post and adding data, whether it's an upsert, an update, or or create, whether you're using a put or a post, you'll need to put it in as a list to the data map, same as if you receive it. So that's what we have here. And then we're getting the response back here, and we're pulling the data. And then I'm going to test for it. Did the deal get created? So like before, I'm gonna check first for a false value and assign it to the create deal map or the create deal value. And then if we were able to get the deal, that meant it was created and we got a successful message. Because when you make a create, you'll get a response and it'll give you a success message or a fail message. So here we got a success. So then I'm going to pull the deal ID and redirect the user to that spot. And then our return value, we're passing true, our return value is deal created. And then let me copy the rest in. So from here, there's not much different than what we saw in the other ones, but there's one minor difference that I wanted to showcase here. So since this is slightly different in the fact that I'm just passing the message, whether it's a success or a failure, and whatever the failure response is, I had to structure this loop a little differently. So what I needed to do is I needed to get the key, because it comes in I'm grabbing the map from the list. So I want to get the key and then the value of the key. That way I can write back and say what we have going on here. And then it's going to come back and let me know what's going on, good or not good. And then we'll get an email out. So this here, I've tested it out. It was working. So let's give it a shot, and I'll show the email. If we're successful, there'll be no email, and then maybe I could go in and make a modification to give a failing message. Let's put the ID in. Great. So here's our record. I'm gonna refresh it. Let's test it out. Should redirect us there. And maybe it didn't work. Redirected us to production. So that means when I refreshed the sandbox recently, so I must not have modified the variables. But we should find it over here. Here we go. So this is the record that we created. Let's check the timeline here. Yep, that matches up perfectly. So that created. Now, if we go back then to the account, so I want to show. Let's go to manage buttons. So I want to modify this so that it breaks, so that you could see an example of what what the message looks like. It's pretty simple. It's a couple lines in an email, but it's been working out fairly well for myself. So let's I don't think I can do that. I think that should break it right there, because that's not a valid record. And then let's go back to our deals and go back to the account. Give it a shot. Yep, so that failed. So in a moment, I should get a message in my email. Okay. Let's see if I can post this in here. See if this opens up. Yeah, so this is what we get here. So it says the test to retrieve contact data passing, the test to create deal failing. Reason, incorrect format to retrieve from JSON response. I don't think in this instance that's what happened. And I think this is where an instance where I'm actually running into a problem and I need to modify the code. But we did get a message back, which is what we were looking for. So then if I move up to my future tests here, this is a future scenario that I'd be looking to work at. So not much change here. The difference is down here, I don't have the loop. Instead, I would put the loop in the email sending into its own function and make an API call. And the error message that we just saw, that's actually a component that I'm looking to improve on. Because really the error message that we should have gotten there was that was an invalid ID to pass for the contact. But that's not the error message that we got. So there's a couple modifications that I would be looking to make there. But this is kind of where I started from, and where I'm looking to go. Couple other ideas I had that didn't, as I was testing them out. I'm going to stop sharing and switch over to the slideshow. The couple other ideas I had, which I chose not to explore for reasons that I can't remember anymore, but was creating, creating a custom module, and it would be like error messages. I believe I had seen in a previous session for this meeting that somebody had done that. I don't remember why I didn't pursue that route, but it had seemed to be a really lucrative way to keep track of errors, because then you can just go to it and you can look through that module. So when you hit an error, you just create a record in that module and you keep moving through your code. So that was an idea that I had, but currently not using it. You're going to find scenarios where you may realize that it just doesn't feel like Deluge is the right tool for the job. And that's good, because if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem is a nail. Said somebody at some point that I have no clue who it was, but it is a great thing. And just like, say, a carpenter or an electrician or any tradesman has a plethora of tools, us as developers need to make sure that we have plenty of tools in our tool belt, because Deluge is great for a lot of use cases, but there can be some use cases where you're going to need a different tool. That might be, third-party application that ties in with Zoho, such a tool such as Zoho Flow or Zapier. Those are great tools to do various things, to integrate with other applications and to orchestrate what you need to happen. we could be using a serverless function, such as a Zoho Catalyst. They have serverless functions. There's other platforms such as the Google Cloud, AWS, Microsoft, Azure, that provide serverless functions. And then you can use custom APIs, so that could be a custom backend application that you build. And then you need a front end as well. I have a use case for that I'll dive into here shortly. Okay, so what are some scenarios where you might need to use other tools? Well, here's a couple scenarios that I've run into. That could be there we go. The length or complexity of the code. Could also involve creating or updating multiple records with lots of conditions. That might be a use case where you might want to explore something else. I recently came across a piece of Deluge code that was 1,100 lines long. And there was a couple other problems with the code and just the whole process, but that was a use case where I felt like it might not have been the best in there, because it was really hard to troubleshoot, hard to modify and update the code. It wasn't very modular. It's a lot of repetition of things in there. So, if something was repeated in 4 places and the logic of those 4 places needed to change, then you had to change all 4 and you had to test all 4. Then another situation where you may find it useful is if you're having to daisy chain a lot of different processes, where you got your script running and it updates a field on a record or a couple of records, which triggers other workflows, which triggers another function. So I've seen that, and that might be a case where you might want to consider some other tools. Let's go back. And then another one is schedules. So if you need to do a lot of frequent schedules where you're syncing or updating data with other applications, that's a great time to consider using other tools. This is especially relevant. I had asked this question in the last call with Zoho Books. The API limits you, in all the finance applications, limits you to 30 API calls a minute. And so if you need to pull a large volume of record, you're going to have to batch that out. And you might need to make 10 API calls a minute, and you're going to want to put that in, say, on a cron, or put it in a queue, which a cron will then pull from a queue in a application. So serverless, I mentioned, it's AWS, Google, Azure, Zoho Catalyst. Some of the benefits there are you have higher timeouts. So you're not limited to a 5-minute timeout where you would hit that with the Deluge function. It could be as high as 15 minutes on AWS. I'm not as familiar with the Azure timeouts, but that provides you with a lot more flexibility. You can also increase the CPUs and RAM that's used. So if you need to run the function faster, you certainly can do that. You can also bring in different libraries for what you need. There's a lot of use cases where that can be helpful. Maybe you're gonna hit a couple different API endpoints and there's already a library for that endpoint. Well, then you can pull that library in and you don't have to write all the code out. You just write maybe 1 or 2 lines to hit the endpoint to retrieve data. Very similar to when you're in Deluge and you're doing an integration task. So Zoho.crm.get records, that's using their library. So you can get that too in other languages. Another great thing that you can do is you can get very verbose and detailed with your logging. You can write to files. You can scroll through and see exactly where it went. If you have a serverless function, you could potentially have a couple files that are running. And if you need to narrow down what happened, the logs will tell you. Specifically, I know this in Ruby and Python. You'll be able to see, file A called the function, which is in file B, and then at the top, it called another function halfway down, and you'll be able to trace all that with the logs, which is really helpful. And then custom applications. So the possibilities are really endless. I think that's self-explanatory. That's why they're custom applications. One use case that we're finding is to integrate all of our platforms into Zoho. It just made sense for us to do more of a monolithic type app. We're a smaller development team, and as we talked through it, it just made more sense to have one spot to go to build an integration to another platform, to hit another API endpoint on that platform, and then pull it into Zoho, because then we can keep our library for Zoho in that one spot. We can modify as the Zoho APIs change, which I've seen a couple of new versions come out the last couple of years. I think we went from 2.1 to 3 to 4 to 5. And then I even saw that somebody saw 6 in the wild. So I'm guessing 6 is on its way. So if you want to modify your library, it's a lot easier to do that in a monolithic application versus, say, if you have a handful of serverless functions, you may have built specific libraries in there, and if you want to take advantage of the new APIs, you would have to go through and modify all those functions. So for us, that has worked great, and depending on your scenario, that might work great too. I know if you're a partner, my experience working as a partner and consulting with clients is that a monolithic app wasn't best in that scenario. It was generally best if you needed to do something out of Zoho to do a serverless function, because then you're dealing with tenanted situations. So like on a Google Cloud, you can manage multiple clients. You can do similar things with AWS, so that's really beneficial there. Another thing you can do is you can do data storage. I'm doing it time. Okay, so you can store. So if you are pulling data from another platform and it's billing specific, let's say it's usage, you may want to store that. We provide we as a telecommunications provider, we have by law have to store certain things for a certain amount of time. So there's a lot of benefit for us to have to be able to store usage, because it works really good. And I mentioned before, you could set up queues. So if you need to pull data and maybe the third-party application that you're pulling from, maybe it's got a limit, and then you need to put the next batch in a queue, you can do that. If you're hitting the same thing on the Zoho side, or one of the APIs fails for whatever reason temporarily, then you would want to push that into a queue to run again. Especially, I noticed on the Zoho side, it rarely happens, but when it happens, it usually happens like in the middle of the night on the weekends. So you would want to be able to make sure that your API request gets moved into a queue if you get a fail, so that you can retry. All right. Which ties in a bit to the frequent crons. So if in the use case of the Zoho books, you may need to run a cron every minute or every 2 minutes to pull data or to update data there. So that's something that's you can do with your custom applications. And then of course you can handle all sorts of complex processes with that. I know there's other tools out there that you could accomplish some of these things. So this certainly wasn't to be all inclusive or exhaustive, but these are some of the main tools that I use, that I'm seeing other people use. So that's what I wanted to cover on that end. And then I'll leave you with this. If at first you don't succeed, you're getting errors, call it version 1.0. And then go from there. And you can move on to version 1.1 and so on and so forth. And then I'll leave it up for questions. That's that's what I got. And I'll stop sharing.
What are limits of Deluge at present in terms of timeout, lines of code, etc.?
Actually, there isn't any limitation with respect to the number of line of code that you are writing in a function or in any other Deluge actions. But let's take it for an example. If you have a custom function and we have a timeout, like the line of code needs to be completed within 5 minutes. Like it needs to be executed and completed within 5 minutes. If it executing more than 5 minutes, the action be terminated from the backend in order to avoid some performance issues on the server end associated with the data center of the client. So the timeout is 5 minutes, but there isn't any line of code in Deluge. Yeah, you can use the delay and sleep, but let's take it for an example. You're performing an API call, and if you're trying to implement the delay for at least 30 seconds a delay, just for an example, okay? So once the first API call get executed, ideally a 30-second will be a delay in your complete execution. So it will consume around like 20%, like 10% of the complete timeout of your complete function execution. So yes, you can implement the Deluge, but it should be in a minimal number, like a second or a two.
Eric, you had something to share here.
Oh yeah, I was going to mention I remember seeing I don't know if the number is right, but there was a limit on the number of statements you can execute in a function. I think it was 5,000. I know it was a larger number, but
yeah, it depends on the subscription and the number of lines to get executed. But there isn't any limit on number of lines we can write in a Deluge. It depends on the number of lines being executed.
I have a unique problem. Like, let's say I'm creating a new record or something, updating a new record using a Deluge. I mean the API. So if I try to fetch the same record instantly, probably the database isn't giving the latest one. It is actually always a old one. Let's say if I create a new record and I'm trying to fetch the same record instantly, I'll get the messages empty. So that's what we just need a delay.
May I know how exactly you're adding the record? Using an API or using the Deluge tasks?
Using a API also. And also sometimes it was created using some automated way, like a web forms and so many other things.
Okay, if you're using an API, from the response itself, you can get the ID of the newly created, and you can, in the next line of code, you can use get record by ID to pull the record that was added using the first API call.
Yes, but we have facing this issue majorly if it is created through web form.
You mean from the external service automations?
Yes.
May I know the service to which you are performing the automation?
It's just a web form. Just we have added inside our websites.
No, I'm referring to the Zoho service to which you are performing the API.
No.
Zoho creators, Zoho books. Yes, you're right.
Okay, so it is majorly CRM, and also we have the similar issue in Creator as well.
Okay, so you mean to say like you are getting a success message from the servers to add a record, but you are unable to get or pass the record that you have added through the external service, isn't it?
No. Let me give the straight thing. So we are trying to design a way like if a new record. I'm just giving a blunt example, like that if you are creating a new lead, so based on the new lead, so we have some continuation functions like example a duplicate check. So if since there is a so the Zoho only supports only one way of duplicates by default by that making it as a unique identifier. But if there is a multiple combinations of duplicates, like let's say email along with the phone number, so this function is right now doesn't available inside either in CRM, or we can able to achieve the similar in the creator as well. So which means there are two unique identifiers, but we are unable to combine it. So what we are trying to do is we are just trying to get all the records through. We are just trying to search all the records through the API. So while we searching, so we are unable to find the records which is just now created. So it takes approximately 15 to 30 seconds to reflect through the API search if the record is created.
I got you. Actually, it is possible to perform a duplicate more than one field value in a creator. Yes, I agree. Using the direct UI level, it is not possible. But let's take it for an example. You are adding a record through API. What you can do, you can create a workflow in the validation on form submission with the multiple combinations that you would like. That shouldn't be any no duplicates entries. And if you are hitting an API, if it falls under the if validation that you have created, it doesn't add the record, because API will trigger both on-validate and on-success. If the on-validate workflow gets failed, it won't add the record, and it will explicitly throw you the error message in the response of the API as well.
My question here is not about the duplicate. This is one of the scenarios. So we just try to add the sleep. Yes, I think we are also trying to use the similar sleep using the outside API hitting. But the problem is the Deluge workflow itself has a timeout. I think it is approximately 50 seconds or 1 minute. I am really not sure. So which means your function, if your function number of even the number of lines doesn't matter. If a function takes more than certain amount of time, it will automatically terminate it. I mean, the HTTPS will be automatically terminated. So that is also one of the problems.
Yeah, it is a 40 seconds. If you are performing an invoke URL using Deluge, it is like a 40 seconds of a timeout error.
Yeah.
If you aren't getting any response from the target server, ideally we will close the socket and the invoke URL will return an error message like an internal exception. So this is a default behavior exception that we are handling from the Deluge end. Because if we aren't getting any response from the server end to which you are performing the API for more than 40 seconds in the sense, it is an adequate time to return the response from the server to which you are performing the API. If we are unable to get a response within 40 seconds in the sense, we are closing the socket and we will terminate the API as well.
Yeah, I do understand. So is there any standard formula which can be implemented at least a 5 seconds delay or 1 second delay?
Yes, you can, but if you are trying to perform a subsequent API calls in the sense, implementing a delay won't work, because as Augustine messaged in the chat, so if you're going to play around with an API and if you're simultaneously going with an Deluge delays in the sense, it would based on the number of APIs that you are going to perform in some point of time, it will terminate the workflow because it will cause the timeout exception of the Deluge, the 5 minutes. So handling the 5 minutes Deluge exception as well as handling the 40-second invoke URL exception in the similar way is quite a big task for now. So from the Deluge end, we have already taken this to the product management team, because right now it is not possible to increase the 40-second timeout for the invoke URL, but we are working on increasing the timeout of the Zoho Deluge. Because if we are able to perform more than 5 minutes of a Deluge action, it would be great help. You can implement the delays and you can perform the action. So we are working on it, but right now this is the current behavior.
I have one more thing. Anyway, somebody else has raised his hand. So once he finished, I'll ask another question.
Sure.
Yeah, I saw a comment there about using COQL. I don't run into the delays that you mentioned, but when I use COQL, I sometimes run into the delays. Sounds like maybe that hasn't been other people's experience, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, let me continue my second question. So the another problem we are right now facing is especially the rollback options. So is there any way we can use implement the rollback concept in Zoho Deluge? Right now, I don't think it is available.
Like, if you don't mind, can you please give me some example about how exactly you would like to implement the rollback?
Okay, let me do the same scenario. Let's say if a API is failed, so we just need a retry, automated retry.
You can use try and catch. If the try gets failed, automatically the catch will get triggered. Within the cache, you can do your action. So as Eric demonstrated, if the try gets failed, you will get notified with an email. Similarly, you can use the same try and catch in the Deluge as well.
No. The problem is, again, it is actually associated with the time. So let's say if the data is not available, then if the rollback option, let's say if it tries after 5 seconds, it is not in terms of Deluge, but it is in terms of workflow itself. Let's say if the workflow is failed, so if there is any way we can re-trigger the workflow after 5 minutes or something, some interval. Because yeah, I do understand try catch, but the problem right now is try catch is very instant. It's a fraction of second, so it basically won't help much.
Actually, implementing a delay concept for the entire workflow isn't available in a Deluge. We do have a schedules, like if any workflow execution got failed, instead of the cache, you can add a dummy record in any of the modules, even in Creator or in Zoho CRM. And based on the particular module newly added data, you can configure a scheduler, like a 1 minute or a 2 minute delay. So after a particular time, you will get notified over an email, or you can do some actions in the scheduler. So this is like a least automation that you have when the entire workflow gets failed or terminated by some action. You can have a try and catch within the workflow. And instead of the exception handling, you can add a record into the newly created module or a form. And from that particular module, you can configure a scheduler, like 1 minute or a 2 minute delay. Within the scheduler, you can do some action. So if any record get added into the newly created module as a result of an exception, based on the particular data, you can run a scheduler.